3 finalists have been announced in the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes, and unfortunately, the New York Mets are not one of them. Did they do enough to pursue Sasaki, and what comes next? I'm going to break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. For big upsets, the game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes, when it comes to the New York Mets, they're over. But the whole league is on watch right now as Sasaki will make his decision potentially in a couple of days. The window to sign opens up on January 15th. That's Wednesday. We might know where he's going to land. We just know already that it won't be with the Mets. On Monday, we saw a bunch of teams just one by one get taken off the board. There was, I think, 8 teams that got a meeting with Sasaki, and the Mets were at least one of those 8 teams. But first, it was, the Giants have been told they won't land Sasaki. The Cubs are out, and it was just one by one stripping away, and the Mets are not going to land the Japanese phenom starting pitcher that could have been their ace this upcoming season. This is a big blow. I think a lot of fans are really holding out hope that Sasaki would be this missing piece that would unlock the Mets rotation. It's not going to happen. Instead, he will either be signing with the Dodgers or the Padres, which is what everyone has expected this whole time. Those always seem like the two logical landing spots. The Dodgers, for obvious reasons, they are Japan's team right now with Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. So Sasaki join the fold could be the best place for him, not only to win, because obviously the Dodgers are the top team in baseball right now, but also a chance to play with a couple of mentors, his peers from Team Japan in the World Baseball Classic, and also a chance potentially to be looped in with those guys on endorsements in Japan. So there's a lot of things that make the Dodgers an ideal landing spot. The problem, and the thing that I was hoping would prevent him from signing with the Dodgers, is the fact that they have 7, 8, 9. If you really want to look at the depth chart, probably 10 viable starting pitchers. I mean, they really do have a wealth of pitching talent. They don't need Roki Sasaki. They have Blake Snell. They have Ohtani. They have Yamamoto. They have Tyler Glasnow. They have Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin coming off injury. They have Clayton Kershaw expected to be back, not the beginning of the season, but expected to re-sign all the same. They have so much depth, and Sasaki is just another arm they might be adding to their stable. But then there's the Padres, and the Padres have Yu Darvish, who is the most revered Japanese starting pitcher going right now in Major League Baseball, who could be the mentor to a Roki Sasaki and the chance to be the foil to the Dodgers. You want to build a name for yourself, why don't you go into their division and beat them yourself and really create a name that maybe stands out above a Yoshinobu Yamamoto? Sasaki could be the guy for the Padres and maybe get a whole fan base invested in what he's doing. So I think that is a clear fit as well, and that's why those two teams have always been at the center of these discussions. The third team is shocking, though. It's the Toronto Blue Jays. Forever the bridesmaid, never the bride when it comes to free agency over the last couple of years, but they're always in the mix. They were second on Shohei Ohtani, at least that's what reports say. Now they're in on it. Roki Sasaki went to Toronto, had an in-person meeting with them. He also had an in-person meeting with the Padres. So this is pretty interesting that you have this Blue Jays team hanging around, and everybody is thinking about this sweepstakes. Everyone has their eyes on it because it has great ripple effects through the industry because of the uniqueness of him being a minor league free agent. Essentially, he is part of the international free agent window that's about to open up on January 15th. Teams have that set bonus pool. A lot of times that bonus pool is already agreed upon for most teams. They have a lot of that money already agreed on handshake agreements to a bunch of prospects. And once that date hits, January 15th, everyone puts pen to paper and those prospects officially become part of the organizations. There's now a couple teams who are in a holding pattern. The Dodgers and Padres have told their upcoming class to either wait for a year to sign and get the handshake agreement that they had already come to terms on, or explore offers with other teams. There was one prospect who reportedly got $1.8 million from the Pirates that was going to go to the Dodgers for half as much. Now he's signing with the Pirates for more money. So there's some leverage going on with prospects that were going to go to San Diego or to LA, or I guess conceivably to Toronto as well, that now maybe are looking at other teams that are all of a sudden in the market. Maybe the Mets can swoop in and get one of those guys. We really don't know all the ripple effects of this, but right now, those are the three teams. And when it comes to money that can be spent, each team has that set allotted pool. Because the Dodgers signed Shohei Ohtani last year because they were a luxury tax team, they already lost a couple $1 million from their bonus pool for this upcoming set here in 2025. So they only have a little over $5 million. The Padres have more than that. I think they're in the $6.5 million range. The Blue Jays are in the same range as the Mets, $6.2 million. But those teams can also trade it for up to 60% of their allotted bonus pool. So for the Blue Jays, who are in the same financial position as the Mets when it comes to their bonus pool, they could conceivably trade up to $10 million to sign Roki Sasaki and give him that entire pool. So that might be one of the ways that the Blue Jays have kept themselves in this race, because they are willing to move heaven and earth to get Roki Sasaki. And maybe a team like the Mets wasn't really comfortable doing that. I'm going to talk about Elian Peña in the next segment, the top prospect the Mets are going to sign on Wednesday for $5 million. Maybe they didn't want to lose out on Peña for Sasaki. There's a lot that goes into it. When it comes to the Blue Jays, I think it's one of three things that has them in the mix. Number one is the money, which we've already addressed. Maybe they do have the ability to get up to $10 million, and they are going to give the best offer to Sasaki. The second thing is maybe they really sold him on their infrastructure. They have a great facility when it comes to their spring training in Dunedin, I believe it is. They are first class in a lot of ways as an organization. As far as the money that's poured into the Blue Jays, this is not a small market team by any stretch. They don't always land the free agents because you got to play in another country. But for Sasaki, he's doing that anyway. And remember, again, Ohtani did really consider going to Toronto. So maybe they are really good in these pitches, and they have separated themselves from the pack. That's the second reason. The third reason, the one I think is most likely here, is the same thing that happened with Ohtani. They're just being used right now for leverage, and ultimately, Roki Sasaki is going to end up with the Dodgers. Now, it could be the Padres, but I think if you were going into this process, if you're Joel Wolf, Sasaki's agent, and you have to make it seem like this was not a already arranged marriage, that Sasaki was pushing to come to Major League Baseball and he had every intention to join the Dodgers, you have to put some teams through some hoops. You have to send Sasaki to some other locations to make it appear like he was considering going to Toronto or considering going to San Diego. And then when push comes to shove and it's time to actually sign, oh, wait, guess what? Ha, just kidding. He's going to be a Dodger. I honestly believe that's what's going to happen here, and it's frustrating because they don't need him. If Roki Sasaki went to the Padres, they might trade Dylan Cease, and Sasaki could legitimately be their ace next season. The Blue Jays have some good pitchers, Kevin Gausman, Jose Barrios, Chris Bassett. They could still use another arm. They just signed Jeff Hoffman. I don't know if they're actually going to make Jeff Hoffman a starter as he was hoping to be, similar to Clay Holmes. I think they might just stick with what they have, which would be Yariel Rodriguez being their fifth starter, a guy that was also a reliever when he played in Cuba, on the national team in Cuba. He might have gotten a start, but I think he went to Japan. That's where he was a reliever. Trying to remember my international free agents from a year ago. I think Rodriguez did have like 2 years in Japan where he was a closer, but came over to be a starting pitcher. Experiment didn't work great the first year. Maybe he's going to try it again. It would make sense, though. Sasaki could be the guy that would put the Blue Jays over the top. And maybe they believe he is, or they are an organization that can help him with his pitching. Maybe he saw their pitching lab and they answered his homework really well in those meetings, and he loves it there. Ultimately, I still think he goes to the Dodgers in all of this. If not the Dodgers, I'm still thinking it's the Padres before the Blue Jays. And that, pretty much if he does go to one of those two teams, I think ultimately the Mets didn't have much of a chance anyway. So they did their best job with the pitch, but they are not one of the finalists here. What I want to talk about in the next segment is, could Elian Peña have played any role in the Mets not being a finalist for Sasaki? Was their commitment to Peña too much for them to pass up, where they just decided, hey, bird in hand, let's stick with what we're planning to do in international free agency? I want to go through that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. For big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's the FanDuel app, and it'll give you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. That's not just the NFL. Maybe you want to look at NBA action, or maybe you want to look into MLB futures. Check out the odds for the Mets to win the World Series, or maybe to win the division. Maybe you feel like Juan Soto is going to find his way to the MVP this year. You can find all of that over at FanDuel. And remember, again, if you just visit FanDuel.com and join today, you're going to get started with that $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We're getting closer and closer to 12,000 subscribers, our next goal. I think we're within 200 now. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe and get us that much closer. Now let's talk about Elian Peña. So the New York Mets have that $6.26 million in international bonus pool spending. $5 million of it is committed to one of the top international prospects in this class, shortstop Elian Peña. He's actually ranked by MLB Pipeline as the number 3 prospect in this class. Roki Sasaki is 1. Josuar de Jesus Gonzalez is number 2, another shortstop prospect that is rumored to be signing with the Giants. And then you have Peña at number 3. There's another outlets that prior to this most recent update that had Sasaki on the list, that had Peña at number 1 earlier on when the Mets first agreed that they were going to sign him to this $5 million deal. He's 17 years old, turned 17 in October. Evaluators rave about his off-the-field makeup and his in-game savvy. That came directly from MLB Pipeline. If you look at the top international prospect rankings, they have a write-up on him. They say, again, rave about his off-field makeup, in-game savvy, believing he has legitimate 5-tool impact potential across the board. They talk about his hit tool being the calling card, his ability to have great discipline at the plate, and he pairs that with really good bat speed, an athlete that should grow into his body more, be able to develop even more power, be stronger on the diamond, potentially be able to move from shortstop to third. That's where his ultimate landing spot is, has speed. I mean, he's basically the complete package, and a guy that was so highly regarded that he was able to command $5 million, which for some teams like the Dodgers would have basically been the entire pool. And for the Mets, it's 80% of the pool. What's $5 million out of 6.26? Not the best at math here. Quick math on the calculator tells us, it's actually pretty spot on, 79.8%. So yes, it's about 80% of the Mets slot that's going to go to that one guy, but he's worth it. And he's the type of prospect that you sign, that you hope can be a legitimate game changer, that can be a superstar. And guys like this level of athlete can fly through a system. I would imagine he's going to spend this summer in the Dominican Summer League. But once he gets stateside, you never know. He could be playing low A ball his first year in 2026. Then he could be starting off in high A in 2027. And from that point on, he can hit his way and fly through some levels. You really don't know how quickly he can progress. I would say conservatively, you're probably not going to see him until 2029, the earliest, which is when he is 21 years old still, because he turned 17 again in October. So 2029, you're looking at a 21-year-old season for Elian Peña. And so that's why it's pretty funny when I saw some fans today that were freaking out this idea that the Mets are spending $5 million of their bonus pool on a shortstop and maybe thinking, why aren't they spending that money on pitching? Well, shortstop is just good player in prospects, right? Mark Vientos was a shortstop prospect. Once he actually got into the Mets farm system, it was pretty clear he wasn't going to play shortstop at the big league level. So these guys move around. He could be a center fielder by the time he gets up. He can be a second baseman, a third baseman, a left fielder. We really don't know. But what we do know is he is a supreme athlete that the Mets have landed. When it comes to scouting grades, Pipeline has him at a 65 hit tool. This is on the 20/80 scale. 80 is best possible. Anything 50 or above is good. Once you get to a 60 grade tool, that's a really above average tool. So the hit tool at 65, that jumps out. Field tool at 60, that jumps out. Power, run, and arm all at 50. And these are tools that can progress as he develops, as he ages, as he gets stronger. They might all get better. His overall grade is a 60 out of 80. That is a really good prospect. So this is not a bad consolation prize, and it's kind of more than that because it's what you were planning on the whole time. How could Peña really factor in, though? The only way where I really could have seen Peña stopping the Mets from signing Sasaki is if they were potentially going to be a finalist, but they weren't given that green light that they were going to be the team. They would have had to put Peña on hold, ask him to wait a year to get that $5 million. Who knows how it would have shaken out? Yes, if you could have gotten Roki Sasaki to headline your rotation next year, you do it and you deal with the consequences. But if you aren't even getting that guarantee, hey, if you can clear $10 million in bonus pool spending, you will have Roki Sasaki. If it's not that clear cut, and it's just, hey, if you can get the money in line, you're going to be one of the 3 or 4 finalists, then it makes sense to take the bird in hand. And also, if it does take a $10 million bonus pool to get Sasaki and you have to make all these trades, I think all of a sudden this idea that you're getting Roki Sasaki for free, it goes out the window a little bit because you're going to have to make deals to get that extra bonus pool money. Now, if he signs with the Dodgers for $2.5 million, well, that will, for one, indicate that that was his landing spot all along, and the Mets had no hope anyway. So really, however you look at this, it was always a long shot that they were going to get Sasaki. And as fans here, you really just have to understand that this is not a bad international window for the Mets. The fact that they're getting one of the top, before Sasaki came into the fold, 1 or 2 prospects in this class, that's a huge win for the organization. Yes, they're still thin on pitching in some respects, particularly frontline pitching, but this was always a pipe dream. It was one that I held out some hope for because I was probably swindled a little bit by Joe Wolf and what he said. And again, he played this perfectly to make it seem like he wasn't always going to go to the Dodgers or the Padres. And hey, maybe they surprise us and he actually signs with the Blue Jays and I can eat my words. But Joe Wolf coming out and saying he'd go to a small market team and he really cares about who's going to develop him as a pitcher. I mean, you're looking at some organizations, the Blue Jays and the Padres in particular, that haven't necessarily been heralded for their ability to develop pitching. So this idea that, oh, yeah, he's going to go to Toronto for their ability to develop his arm, I don't know if it's necessarily founded. And I could say the same thing about San Diego, to be completely honest. I think he ends up going to the Dodgers. Again, that's my prediction at this point. We'll see if I'm right. We'll see if I'm wrong. And all this was a big charade. And if so, at least the Mets were in it and they got a chance to put their word in, and ultimately it doesn't work out in their favor. But now you got to look ahead to the 2025 season. There is no Sasaki that's going to salvage this offseason for the fans that think that the Mets have not addressed their starting rotation enough. So let's look at it one more time. Do the Mets really have what it takes to contend this year with this starting rotation? And if not, is there anything else they can do before opening day? We'll go through that in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So let's talk a little bit about the Mets starting rotation. I know we have sort of hashed this and rehashed this over and over and over again, but there was always that caveat. Oh, maybe they signed Roki Sasaki. Well, now you're looking at the Mets rotation, and it's probably going to remain as is. Kodai Senga, you need him to bounce back after an injury-plagued year. Sean Manaea, please repeat and do what you did last year. Frankie Montas, can he turn the clock back to 2021? David Peterson, can he build off of a breakout season? And Clay Holmes converting from a reliever to a starter. Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, Tylor Megill are all there for depth. Jose Budo likely is in the bullpen, but he always could be stretched out to be a starting pitcher. And then waiting in the wings is your top prospect, or at least your top pitching prospect. And that's Brandon Sproat, who soared through high A and double A last year, did falter once he got to triple A, will likely start the season back in triple A. And you never know. He could be like Christian Scott last year, where he clearly proves he has mastered that level immediately. And after a month and a half, you never know. We might see Brandon Sproat up in the big league rotation if they need an arm. But let's just talk about what happens if, come opening day, one of their top 5 starters are not available. Because that happens in spring training. Frankie Montas has whatever happened to him. He has a elbow strain, whatever it is. I don't want to put that on him. We'll knock on some wood for him. But the point being, one of the 5 guys is not available to start the year, which happens. Oftentimes, you can almost expect it to happen. Well, now you're rolling with a starting 5 that will include a Canning, a Blackburn, or a Megill. And potentially, if you want a 6-man rotation, maybe it's 2 of those guys. Who do you feel the most confident in? Griffin Canning gave up more runs in the American League than any pitcher last year. Now, he got over 170 innings pitched. I think that is extremely valuable. At the same time, he was not very good. He had 1 pitch that was really good. That was his changeup. Everything else ultimately was not great, and his fastball got destroyed. Gave up 16 home runs on his fastball. Batter slugged .529 against it, and he lost 1.3 miles per hour on his fastball from 2023 to 2024. In 2023, his strikeout rate was about 26%. 2024, his strikeout rate had dropped to 17.6%. His walk rate, 6.7% in 2023, climbed up to 8.9% in 2024. So you're walking more batters. You're striking significantly less batters out. It's just a rough year. Now, if you go back to 2023, he did pitch to a 4.32 ERA, had an expected ERA of 4.01. So it is in there for Griffin Canning. I think the Mets' hope is maybe they can add some life to his fastball, help him perfect some of his other breaking pitches. Maybe they have a sweeper all of a sudden that he comes to camp with that looks great. A guy that does have a good curveball and a pretty decent slider. So maybe that's it. Maybe you teach him a new variation of a breaking ball, or maybe you help him perfect the ones that he has. This is a pitching lab experiment for an arm that got over 170 innings last year. So if he does end up sliding into rotation, and what you're really concerned about is getting innings, he should be a good guy for that. The hope is that he pitches over his head in a Mets uniform and you get far better production than you would expect. And the same exact thing can be said about Paul Blackburn. These are 2 pitchers whose best pitch is their changeup. It doesn't necessarily bode well for being a dominant starting pitcher. Now, it can work. You mix up your other pitches, all of a sudden you can have an arsenal that works, and maybe you do figure it out and you can pitch to a low 4 ERA. And I think if the Mets could get that from either of those guys, they'd be thrilled. If you told me that you're going to get a combined, let's say 250 innings at a 4.3 ERA from those 2 pitchers, and I could sign on the dotted line and make that happen, I would do it in a heartbeat. A heartbeat. That would be remarkable if they got that many innings from those guys at that level. But we really don't know. Honestly, looking at Blackburn, looking at Canning, the more I look at their careers, look at their stuff, the more I actually get excited about Tylor Megill, if I'm being completely honest, because he throws harder than both of them. He has much better extension. McGill's a big dude. If he has now another offseason to work on that splitter, or the Great American Spork, as they call it, that he can pair with that fastball, if he continues to work on all these other pitches he throws, there was 8 different pitchers that Megill threw last year if you go to Baseball Savant. So he's got a lot of different pitches in his bag. He's got to find an arsenal that works, though. Sometimes, if you have that many, breaking balls or just different offerings outside of the fastball, you have that many, you just don't have a good one or a good set of pitches to go to. But hopefully he can round out his arsenal. And I can see Tylor Megill beating both those guys out. I think ultimately the fact that Megill can get optioned and those two guys can't does give them a huge edge in spring training. But you never really know how it's all going to play out. And I actually think there is a world where the Mets really lean into their starter depth and carry all these guys. And you're seeing a lot of Milwaukee Brewers management, which we've seen the Brewers do for years, where you have like 3 real starters in the rotation, and then you have these bullpen days where maybe Griffin Canning got the start, or maybe you went with an opener. Maybe Jose Budo got the start, even though he's been pitching in leverage. He takes the first 4 outs or takes the first 2 innings, or maybe just the first inning, and then you hand the ball out to Canning for 3, and then Blackburn comes in for a couple. I mean, they really could have these guys in Swiss Army knife roles to try to really just patch together the back end of the rotation. I also will say, when it comes to off days, the Mets do have an off day in each of the first 3 weeks of the season. 4 out of 5 weeks in May, they have an off day. So really, they might only need a spot starter for 1 turn to get through May, the first 2 months of the season, needing a 6th starter spot for Senga. So it might be a situation where they do roll with a 5-man rotation, and Blackburn and Canning are the last 2 arms in that bullpen, picking up bulk relief opportunities and getting a spot start here and there. I think that could absolutely be the way the Mets go with all of this. Now, to give you a little bit of that free agent rumble, right? Is there anything else the Mets can do? If you look at the market right now, one option would be to re-sign Jose Quintana. And if they did that, it would have to be under the context of having a trade lined up, I think, for one of their starting pitchers, likely Blackburn, I would say, because he's pretty cheap. I mean, him and Canning, I think, are making the same amount of money, but you typically don't sign somebody and trade them immediately. So if they were to trade Blackburn and sign Quintana and really have a locked-in 6-man rotation where Canning is just depth in the bullpen, that's one way you can go about it. But I think the Mets probably view Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, Tylor Megill, they probably view that group and say, is there a chance that we can get similar production from those guys that we would get for Quintana at a much cheaper cost, especially because all of them are already under contract? I just don't know if Quintana is coming back. I really doubt that he is. So then beyond Quintana, who else is on the market that is a clear enough upgrade that it's worth signing and maybe having too much depth, too many starters on the 40-man roster and on the active roster that you really can't manage to have a good bullpen at the same time. So with that said, you need to really have some standout arms. And the only 3 that are left on the market that I view as game changers potentially, Nick Pivetta, and he's got a qualifying offer attached. The Mets aren't going to do that. Jack Flaherty, 1 in 5 years, but now he's going to come down to a more affordable contract. Potentially he signs the Boras special, even though he's not represented by Scott Boras, but a 3-year deal with opt-outs after each year. For the Mets, though, is that really attractive? If it's a 1-year deal, straight up pillow contract, I'd be on Jack Flaherty. But the idea of Jack Flaherty coming back after a great season, and then maybe he reverts to 2023 form, and all of a sudden it's a horrible contract on your books. I mean, you just don't know. There's too much variance. I don't know if I like him necessarily. And then you have Max Scherzer, who's unlikely to come back anyway. But I just want to acknowledge that of the pitchers on the market, I think because of his name value and the fact that he was pretty decent when he did get on the mound last year, you could say that he's probably better than Canning and Blackburn for sure, Megill, and you could imagine if he's healthy, he might be better than everybody but Senga or Manaea. But it just doesn't seem realistic to think that Max Scherzer is going to re-sign with the Mets, especially when there's just so many different arms. Does he really want to be part of a 6-man rotation? I guess he might at this stage of his career, but the bottom line is it's just not likely. So you look at free agency, you read all the tea leaves of what the Mets have said lately, which is that they are pretty much done with their rotation. And I'd imagine that this is about it. And they're just going to trust their ability to get the most out of those guys, to get the most out of Montas and Holmes. So those are really good starting pitchers in the rotation, because the fact is those guys can go the other way and you're really hurting for starting pitching. I think their bet that they're making is between those two guys, Canning, Blackburn, and Megill. Of those 5 starters, can at least 2 of them put together a good season? If that's the case, and you have complete faith in David Peterson, and you believe that Kodai Senga is going to be healthy, and Sean Manaea is your guy now, then the rotation can be fine. And I do think that that's not a horrible plan. It just leaves me a little bit concerned about the frontline starting pitching. And maybe Brandon Sproat is the savior. He comes up this season. They manage his innings in a way that they can get him through the whole year. And they got Sproat to add into the fold. I would love to see it, but that is asking a lot of a rookie. So I think this ultimately is a team that has to make a trade at the deadline. That's why I talked about Sandy Alcantara on the show yesterday. If you didn't catch that, check it out. Because I really think that this will be a year where the Mets are going to have to make a move at the deadline. Luckily, by the time they get there, maybe some of their other prospects have either stepped up enough where all of a sudden one of them is an answer in their rotation, or they're putting together good seasons in Syracuse and Binghamton. You have more capital to go make a move. Last little piece I want to say about all of this stuff when it comes to the rotation, and just sort of to put a bow on the Sasaki sweepstakes. The Mets, obviously, they have Peña locked in. They have that extra $1 million and change that they can play with, and you can make trades in increments of $250,000 for your bonus pool money. Could the Mets sell $500,000 of their bonus pool money and maybe pull off a trade? I don't know if you could, with bonus pool money, get one of those Dodgers starters alone. Like, I don't think you can just say, hey, here's $500,000 to get the Sasaki. Give us Dustin May. I mean, they're not going to do that. But you might be able to get a depth arm from the Dodgers. Let's just say Ben Casparias is available for bonus pool money. Ben Casparias pitched well against the Mets, if I'm not mistaken, in that playoff series. He's 25 years old, and he made his debut last year, pitched in 3 games before the playoffs. So you would have full control, full options. If the Mets can get a Dodgers arm out of the Sasaki sweepstakes for bonus pool money, I hope to take advantage of it, because they can maybe get an optionable arm that they can stash away in Syracuse, and that just gives them more depth. So I hope that is one of the things that we see happen over the next couple days as this Sasaki drama ends. But the bottom line is this Mets team is rolling with what they have. They are leaning into the depth they've accumulated, and it doesn't have a lot of frontline depth. So some things are going to have to break right for them this year. The one thing that they can do at this point is really build out that bullpen, land a Tanner Scott. Make sure that you have the type of bullpen that can make up for a spotty rotation if you end up in that situation. And also, you better have an elite starting lineup. That's where the Pete Alonso sweepstakes continue. Can we even call it a sweepstakes? The Pete Alonso saga continues. If you can sign him, if you can get a good DH in here, whether that's bringing back Jesse Winker, whether that's trading Starling Marte to clear a spot where Jurickson Profar can be your everyday DH, whatever it is, the Mets need to add 2 more bats and 2 arms to that bullpen, and they have completed what I would say is a very good offseason, where the only question might just be that starting rotation. But they won't be filling it with a 23-year-old Japanese phenom. And unfortunately, that just makes the Mets a little bit less exciting than they would have been if they pulled off that Hail Mary of a pitch and actually landed him when other teams were always favored in these talks. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. After your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.